Save yourself from de-dollarization because they are killing the mighty US dollar as major global powers are working more than ever on de-dollarization and destabilizing the US dollar, and the US government and authorities are helpless this time. The US dollar is losing its status as the king of currencies, and the greenback is in a weaker position as China, Russia, and Iran seek to de-dollarize energy pricing and trading. New global currencies will emerge, but all of us have our savings deposited in US dollars. So this is a direct threat to all of us. Let me take you through this story of why US dollar is really losing its power. How near is the fall of the mighty dollar? And is the Chinese Yuan the next global currency? And how can you save yourself from de-dollarization? How much time do you have to convert your currency? Before we start, click on subscribe and watch both parts of the story. Let's start with part 1. What went wrong with hegemony of the US dollar? The US dollar was king of the world last year. The world's reserve currency confirmed its status as the ultimate one, crushing rivals gold, the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc, and everyone's favorite, Bitcoin. As the US Federal Reserve raised rates to fight inflation, overseas investors amassed in seeking a higher rate of return, which drove the dollar to a 20-year high. Then the sentiment shifted as September came. Instead of fleeing trouble, investors started looking forward to when the Fed would declare victory in the war on inflation and start cutting interest rates. Falling interest rates would turbocharge global stock markets as investors embraced risk again while fleeing bonds. Anticipating this move, the US dollar index duly crashed, falling 10% from last autumn's highs. It orchestrated a brief rally during the banking crisis when investors ran, spooked of another banking meltdown. A weaker dollar would be accepted by many after last year's dominance. Also, a dollar sell-off could raise demand for oil, gold, and other commodities, which are priced in dollars and will be cheaper to buyers in other currencies if the greenback fades. This will boost the economies of emerging markets, countries such as Mexico and Brazil, which are heavily reliant on these exports as the strong dollar has been tough on emerging markets by driving up the cost of servicing their dollar-dominated debts. Currency values swinging all the time, but the dollar is facing a major long-term challenge to its reserve currency status. Also, not everybody likes playing by US rules. Russia and China would like to call a halt to dollar hegemony, and they're not alone. In 2019, Malaysia's then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad proposed the idea of a common trading currency for East Asia that would be pegged to gold. At the start of the millennium, almost 3/4 of the global currency reserves were held in dollars, which has fallen to 59% today, and the slide looks set to continue. After a century, King Dollar is eventually facing a serious challenge to its dominance. Part 2. Is this the end of US dollar dominance? The US dollar's position as the primary global reserve currency is being challenged because countries are becoming eager to insulate themselves from Washington's influence. The dollar has dominated the global monetary system for decades. Currently, about 60% of foreign exchange reserves held by central banks are in US dollars, and nearly 90% of all currency transactions involve the use of the US dollar. But the dollar's reserve status began to decline in 2014, when some major global powers began to de-dollarize their business dealings. Now, the war in Ukraine and the subsequent sanctions have accelerated the de-dollarization process. But the dollar's reserve currency status hands the U.S. political power and economic strength, and it definitely uses it. To punish Russia for invading Ukraine, Western governments froze around $300 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves last year and expelled Russian banks from the SWIFT international payment system. So-called dollar weaponization has rattled many countries, and not just Russia. Countries willing to continue to trade with Russia, like China and India, have started to do so in yuans and rupees instead, triggering the talk of the de-dollarization of the international trading order. Meanwhile, Brazil and China are now trading with each other in yuan, helping to establish the Chinese renminbi as international currency and dollar challenger, especially in commodities. Rising dollar price makes life difficult for other countries because essentials like oil get more expensive, leaving the big commodity importers at the mercy of exchange rate movements. So, the strengthening economic ties and trade relationships between China and Russia are enhancing the yuan's appeal because it offers a more stable exchange rate. Petro-yuan would make big inroads into dollar authority. G10 nations are shifting away from the dollar and towards local currencies as a security against a towering dollar and U.S. debt ceiling blown up. However, the dollar is in a weaker position with moves by Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran to move away from pricing and trading energy in U.S. dollars. The U.S. dollar still dominates global trade, with almost 90% of forex trade involving the greenback, so it's hard to see that the dollar is losing its reserve status in the near to medium future, yet, with some economics predicting that China's GDP will outpace the U.S. by 2030. The next decade will be crucial. And if the dollar did lose its reserve status to the yuan one day, the subsequent drop in demand would hit the dollar hard and boost rival currencies such as the euro. In the U.S., borrowing costs would surge, while its subsequent debt pile would also grow at a pace. Politically, the impact would be even greater, as China would become the dominant global force. The recent de-dollarization events include: during a press briefing at the Davos Forum in January, Saudi Arabia's financial minister, Mohammed al-Jahdan, said that they were willing to consider trading in currencies other than the U.S. dollar for the first time in 48 years. Last week, Chinese and French energy companies completed the first ever deal on LNG in China using the renminbi yuan currency. Brazil recently announced an agreement with China to trade directly in their own currencies, bypassing the U.S. dollar as an intermediary. The Reserve Bank of India recently allowed central banks from 18 countries to open special Vostro rupee accounts to settle payments in Indian rupees. The U.S. dollar's share of the global market has decreased from 71% to 59% over the last 2 decades, which could shrink even further in the future. So, if credible alternatives gain power, the dominance of America in the global market will be compromised. Part 3. Could China's yuan replace the U.S. dollar as the world's dominant currency? China's economy has been greatly successful by most means. Its GDP of $17.7 trillion is second to only the United States, while being the third largest trading nation in the world, behind the US and EU. However, China's currency only accounts for 3% of global trade, as compared to the 87% market share of the US dollar. So, could China's yuan replace the US dollar as the world's dominant currency? Despite its economic and political power, China doesn't dominate the global flow of fiat currency, but it's looking to change that. Last year, Chinese leaders made it clear that they wanted to boost the yuan's profile as a reserve currency, and China's economy and trade flows are large enough to support such a move. However, the country now needs to convince foreign central bankers to start holding the Chinese yuan in reserve. The People's Bank of China announced a collaboration with 5 nations and the Bank for International Settlements to achieve this in July of 2022. China, along with Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Chile, would each contribute 15 billion yuan to the renminbi liquidity arrangement. Meanwhile, yuan has already become a de facto reserve currency in Russia. Russian leadership turned to China after facing sanctions due to its invasion of Ukraine. Now, 17% of Russia's foreign reserves are denominated in yuan, with yuan being the third most demanded currency on the Moscow exchange. Yuan's status as a reserve currency could be further entrenched as these partnerships become stronger. Economists and researchers argue that replacing the dollar isn't going to be easy or quick. However, they found evidence that yuan reserves were steadily increasing in countries that had tight trade relations with China. This growing influence could make the yuan an alternative to the dollar in a multipolar world, with China chipping away at the dollar's influence over time. Yuan's currency position is similar to the US dollar in the 1950s, so it could just be a few decades before the yuan gains priority. So, can the yuan replace the dollar? Can China's ambition to make the yuan the world's currency lead to a dollar collapse? What do you think? Let me know in the comments section. So, that's all for today, guys. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on the amazing content. Until next time.